Hello, I am Tatev here at Rhizome DC Tacoma Park location in June of 2021. Today I'm honored to be interviewing Luke Stewart, who is a musician and organizer based here in DC and New York. We will talk about memories and visions about Rhizome, but we're taking the approach of oral histories, which means that we'll kind of place you at the center of the story and kind of appreciate the humanity and I don't know, the beauty of our memory that remembers things a certain way, basically. With that, tell me a little bit about who you are, where you're from, the beginning of Luke Stewart.
Let's see, who am I and where am I from? So my name is Luke Stewart, and I was raised in the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and I came to DC in 2005. And since that time, I've been active in several areas of the music community here, and have developed a lot of relationships and experiences in the music from DC and throughout the world. But the community here in DC has been a very important and special, and I think unique place of importance for a person like me who is searching for that as a young person. And so a lot of things have been able to be manifested, and Rhizome is one of them that I've been able to experience the growth of it from the beginning, really, and to be an active participant as an artist and as a member of the community that helps run the space.
Yeah.
So.
We'll get back to DC and Rhizome a little later. I want to just explore the earlier stuff a little more, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah. Tell me about how you were in school. What were you interested in?
In school.
And like you're saying you're searching for what DC gave. Maybe like tell me what that search looked like before you got here.
Right. Well, I remember when I was growing up in Mississippi, and especially once I had started to explore the music and be inspired by the music, and thus also be inspired by the culture, feeling a sense of not having that mentorship, that relationship with elders and people with the historical memory of important events throughout history. And so when I came to DC, I found that almost immediately being embraced by that very community of people who have these important experiences in terms of radical action, protests, social justice movements and things like this, and also the deep musical legacy that's here in DC. And I found my own connection as part of a migration, so to speak. I came to DC to do an internship, and I eventually transferred here from Mississippi, also after Hurricane Katrina, which is definitely a huge part of the reason why I'm here. But also, I think I was able to be, again, embraced by this community in a way that I still feel so very indebted and special, and is a testament to what DC is as a center of culture, and really the center point in history. It is the center of political power in America, and in a way, I think the culture that happens here is thus among the most important in terms of making an impact, which is what I think all artists want to do at the end of the day, is make an impact in some sort of way. So if you make an impact here, and in the way that you make an impact here, I think resonates in a big way.
Yeah.
And I hope people can understand the importance of that as well.
What kind of impact are you talking about?
I'm talking about the social impact of us being in the capital of the United States, and also being in a place that perhaps isn't necessarily the first thing that people think about, especially in the context of, you know, like a New York or an LA or these other great hubs of culture, of which DC is definitely one. But I think that it's important for especially experimental music and, you know, so-called radical forms of art and culture to be present and have a platform in a place like DC. For one, to show, to have that sort of representation in the city, in the seat of power, in the context of the power of America and the reflections of that, but also as a stand for greater exposure for the music in general, outside of the traditional cultural hubs of industry, because that's what makes specifically New York and LA that sort of place that attracts that, because of the industry that's associated with it, and thus the money that's associated with it.
Yeah.
Whereas DC also has an industry like that, but I think that, again, it may not be the thing that people think about first, just based on the access to that greater industry that reaches millions across the world. Our impact reaches millions across the world almost, you know, through the back way, through the influence, through power, the political and social influence of DC culture.
Yeah.
Even in the context of talking about, you know, punk and go-go, their influences are, I mean, just last night on the radio I heard, you know, a popular rap song that had go-go in it.
Oh.
But it didn't say that it was go-go. You know, it's one of those subtle influences that's just in the culture, but without being explicitly recognized.
So you're from DC, you know about go-go. Can you tell what go-go is? Because I don't think most people know what it is.
What is go-go?
Yeah. And why is it so special to DC?
Well, you know, I didn't experience go-go as a young person, as like a teenager, which I think is an important thing for people who are from DC. People that I've interacted with from DC all have memories of being like a young person, especially in 2021. You would, for people my age and younger, you would have had to have been a young person to experience the golden age of go-go, so to speak. And in my experience, and I think a lot of people in my generation in DC have experienced sort of in essence, the greatest demise of culture, of, like, you know, that indigenous culture of DC through the rapid, violent gentrification that DC has gone through.
What is unique about go-go?
Well, go-go is in my mind, in my music analysis mind, go-go is the next evolution of groove-based music, groove-based funky music. Like it's the next beat, the next stage of the groove. You know, it's the pocket, it's the bounce, it's the, you know, from swing to et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's the next stage in the evolution of the beat. And it's a reason why, I think culturally there's a reason why it came from DC specifically, like why it came from the context that it came from in DC.
Which is?
Because it is, you know, it's amongst all the chocolate cities in America, it's the capital of the chocolate cities, even today, I would say. And the fact that it went in that direction musically, I think, is a testament to that sort of cultural dynamic, for sure.
And how do you see go-go in the context of DC today?
Well, today, there's actually I just saw on Instagram earlier. I might be going to a go-go. There's the Mochella movement, the Long Live Go-Go movement, which is great. It's fantastic, and they're really bringing go-go to a greater platform, for sure.
I saw that yesterday. They're doing something today.
They're doing something today. Yeah. And to be honest, in my time in DC, I haven't seen so much excitement and activity about go-go since I've been here. You know,
what changed?
Well, I think the first thing is the actions. Well, the increased political actions around. I think it first started with Occupy back in 2010, then leading into Black Lives Matter, and then basically again, in the story of gentrification, there was the Don't Mute DC movement, which was centered around that go-go corner of 7th and Florida and U Street and Georgia, where literally across, I remember this so clearly, when they were building those apartments called The Shea, there was a huge billboard with the picture of a likeness of Marie Antoinette, and it said, "She is coming, The Shea," and it was literally right across the street from that corner. And obviously those are the people that are complaining about the music. So go-go essentially has become the sound of the revolution in DC, which I think is beautiful.
I feel like that happened in the last couple of years.
It did. It really did.
Because of this shame.
Because of that Don't Mute DC movement. That's what started it, I think. And so now there's a lot more, because of that and because of this cultural moment that we're in, there's been a lot more attention for go-go, more than I've seen and in a long time. And but the fact remains that go-go, even in its heyday, was marginalized and oppressed. You know, the city didn't support it. It villainized it even. It became known for being a place where you get shot, or some violence is gonna go on, or there's gonna be a fight. It got that kind of context. I even heard of, like, whenever I was hearing about go-go, because go-go was from back in the day, there's been several go-go hits that hit international acclaim. And so when I remember hearing about go-go and about DC, it was at a time when DC was, had a very high murder rate and a very high crime rate. And so I heard about go-go, about being the place, like, where fights are gonna happen. But I think, again, that's a reflection of the time that was going on in DC. It was a high crime place. And the city, there are a lot of other people that have done a lot of work in terms of the research and of course old timers, elder people that actually lived it, but it's been marginalized by the city. It was never supported, and it's, even today, it hasn't been supported up until recently. Go-go is an artistic line item now in grant funding.
Yeah.
And so I think while it's a good thing that the city is finally recognizing it, it's a very interesting time for it to be, because I would hear, some elders or some conversations with Washingtonians talking about that go-go will come back once the city is fully gentrified. And it's like, are we living in that time right now? Where when I moved to DC, the city was between 60 and 70% Black American, and now I think it's around 40% since 2005.
Yeah.
And it's been, listed as the most intensely gentrified city in America.
Can you tell me how your experience with it was when you first came to DC? How you felt about it? What stood out to you? And it could be very small, specific experiences. It doesn't need to be like a general thing. And maybe a little bit of how that's changed over years.
Well, I'll say that it was one of the things that impacted me deeply when I first got here, because coming from Mississippi as well, I felt that for the first time moving to DC, I could see racism. It was like a racism that I could experience in a way that I had never felt in Mississippi even.
Do you mind sharing an example of
For example, in a general example, when growing up in Mississippi, just economically and in a lot of ways culturally, everybody's kind of on the same level. You have the obviously your generational wealth from that we now know about, that we talk about now in terms of the families from way back when, the whole good old boy system of down south. You have these sorts of things, but gentrification is racism that you can see, and that was the biggest shock for me. And I remember specifically taking a trip, just taking a drive straight down, some of the streets, taking the the 96 bus from way up Mass Avenue all the way to Anacostia, and seeing the whole thing, early on. And seeing the stratification, seeing seeing the beginnings of the destruction of communities, essentially. And I think also it impacted me in a way because I was searching for the thing that was being destroyed. as a child. You know, again, just bringing it back to the mentorship, the culture, the connection. By the time I got to it, I saw it being destroyed. I saw it slowly being destroyed. And I think that for my generation of black artists in DC who have been around for the time that I've been around, we've been witnesses to that destruction in DC, of neighborhood after neighborhood, spot after spot, coming and going, seeing the rampant segregation within these movements, within these cultural movements, and seeing who gets the resources out of that segregation. And you know, it's a painful thing in a lot of ways, but I think it also gives an important perspective on how things are and how we can move forward today, which for me is just focusing on the music and just focusing on that historical connection and exposing that to as many people as possible.
Cool. Do you want to tell more stories about those distractions, like other spaces that you like unionize or whatnot? I don't know how to begin that story. Just begin as you would like.
Let's see.
I think it's really interesting. You said like there was destruction happening, and that's what you wanted to show. That's a big, like to put it back together, or what's the? Maybe you can tell that
well,
with that lens. Sorry, it's
well,
not
putting
a
it
question,
putting it back together, I think is it's not really about putting it back together, but just, you know, preserving as much as possible. And DC is a place where you have to remind people about what's going on because of the transience, because of the constant influx and outflux of people amongst the context of born and bred Washingtonians that are here.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like it's your city? Do you feel like a part of the city?
Absolutely, yeah,
like,
for sure.
Is it your city?
Is it my city? Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Sure it is. I don't know.
I mean, how many years have you lived?
Who city? Who's my good friend? Who city? That's a tag.
Who city?
Who city?
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel at this point when I meet people, I tell people that I was raised in Mississippi, but I grew up in DC. That's what I say now.
Yeah.
Because it's like that for me. I think that. What was the question again? I'm sorry.
What was it? I didn't formulate it that well. So I guess this is just in my mind, and you can develop this as you wish. But I was just thinking about the reason why you moved. Well, not the reason, but one of the reasons. You're telling me about Katrina.
Mm-hmm.
And then some destruction is going on here. You come here with the intense gentrification.
Yeah.
And then you've been a part of several artistic communities that had to move for the reasons of gentrification exactly, and now we're at this house that is experiencing a similar story. So I just kind of wanted you to reflect on that somehow, however you choose to reflect on that.
Well, I didn't just make that destruction connection until just now between Katrina and communities. So that's very interesting.
I think that's a very big show, like a story of displacement and involuntary displacement. It's not, you know, which displacement always is, but natural disasters is on another level. But nonetheless, like as far as how much control someone has over it, I don't know if it's much different from like gentrifiers buying off Rhizome and like what can you do?
Exactly. Except one is man-made. You know, that's sort of that's where it hurts the most, I think. Is that we're doing it to ourselves, so to speak, or you know, we humans are doing this to ourselves.
Yeah.
And
can you trace like how that kind of care for not just like cultural stuff, but just connection between culture and like social justice kind of stuff. How did that happen for you? When did it start?
I think just in research and again that searching for the connection, starting with the music, I think, and through exploring the music, I think it opened my mind to a lot.
Why do you call it the music?
Because I don't prescribe to like genres and all these things.
Okay.
Except for just for the sake of conversation, but just but I keep saying the music on purpose because it's all music, and whatever you're into, whatever inspires you, that's cool. And a lot of different types of music inspire me. So instead of just saying one kind of music, I'm just saying the music.
Okay.
As a way of the spiritual oneness of the overall sound of music.
Cool.
Anyway.
Back to that big analogy. Tell me what your thoughts are on that.
Anyway, yeah, so I think, again, the music opened my mind to all sorts of different things. And I think it opened a pathway for me to discover the connections between the culture and social justice. Again, the goal of making an impact as an artist, and we want to change the world in some sort of way, and so you figure out how you want to change the world, like what aspects of the world you're interested in changing, what aspects of the world are oppressing you the most, and how can you use your art to create individual personal liberation and also have that sort of impact on someone else, on the audience, in the spirit world, even just having an impact in some sort of way. So I think, I guess naturally, you think about social justice movements. And when I was in high school, I was, you know, I did some actions around, like, you know, the death penalty, stuff like that. I remember going to a couple of demonstrations against the Mississippi state flag, which still had the Confederate battle flag on it.
Oh, wow.
Until recently. I think until like a couple of years ago. Now it's the Magnolia. But yeah, back then they were doing the vote. The first time they voted to keep it. They voted to keep the Confederate battle flag on the flag at that time. And also I was working for a time with a woman who was deeply involved in political organizing in South Mississippi. I would go to her office and like help her out with mailings and things like that. And so yeah, just and also reading and studying the history of the music, the history of the culture, and drawing inspiration from that as a way of how I want to be an artist, and also having the opportunity to develop as an artist, I think is important, because not everybody gets the opportunity to develop as an artist, and I had to create that opportunity in a lot of ways for myself. Choosing to stay in DC, perhaps, maybe was one of them, and you know the pathways of the journey, for sure. You know, in being an artist, we have to tailor make our own situations in order to do it.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, and so yeah, we make decisions in order to be artistic people.
Cool. Let me see. Do you remember how you first connected to this community of improvising folks in DC?
Let's see, how did I first connect? I think it was through Sonic Circus, to be honest, which is an experimental organization. Well, that's for like experimental music, for specifically improvised music.
What about the music?
The music. It was probably through it was through WPFW, and I started working at WPFW in 2008. I had several very powerful mentors there, men and women, and otherwise, and each one, I think, represented different aspects of growth in different genres, yes, from improvised jazz-based music to the blues and more and swing, bebop, you know, but also that historical connection to radical social justice movements that were super prevalent in DC. And again, DC, it was and remains the capital of, I mean, it's arguable, but that strong black identity in DC, and interacting with those people, and learning and being embraced by that, like knowing that even though I wasn't raised in DC, I didn't go to high school in DC, so to speak, but I was welcomed as a person, almost like it's here waiting for me. Yeah. And that I think is something that, in terms of seeing the destruction of culture, I think what we all want, all so-called oppressed peoples, which I don't necessarily ascribe to that, but all those who we're seeking connections, and we want what's ours, you know, or we want what is due in terms of having the possibility of connecting, of finding the connection with the culture, with the spirit. And I think coming to DC and feeling embraced in that way has made me feel, and has affirmed that journey of connection, and also that journey of preserving and promoting that sort of historical memory as well, within the context of today, when again that community is being destroyed, and so it's important to keep that to preserve that voice.
Yeah. I just want to acknowledge that the gym class is starting right now.
Yes, I saw that there were a lot of cycles out there.
Yeah, we're in post-COVID time, so people are doing exercises outside. And last time it got really loud, so expect that. What time is it? Mine? Did you want to change the lens? Tell me the things. Tell me about moves and configurations. Yes.
Okay, I'll start with WPFW.
Yeah.
WPFW for me was, in a lot of ways, my graduate school, my church, my community, also my place of work.
Yes.
And
when did you start working there?
2008 was when I first started interning there, and also when I first started having a program there. I started actually working there, I think, a year or two later, on staff, and it was really just my school, the way that I could serve the community that I loved, that I grew to love, and be embraced by, and having the opportunity to work in that context for a very formative period of my life is something I'll cherish forever. A lot of those relationships I still maintain, and you know, is a source of constant inspiration. And I think it's still amongst the, even through all the changes, I think it's still among the most important radio stations.
Can you tell me a little bit about it?
So again, within the context of DC, it's it represents, its call motto is Jazz and Justice, which I think is kind of says everything in terms of the message and the music. The coupling of that radical social justice legacy of DC with the music of DC, with all forms of the music.
Mm-hmm.
You know, from radical, I think it's all radical, but I think it also was upholding the concepts of early radio, of early black radio in DC, from, you know, like people like Petey Green and you know, the early WHUR. A lot of those people were on that, had come to that station a long time ago and recently. It was representative of a lot of different of those communities coming together and, you know, exposing those stories. Musically, I think it's very powerful as a radio station because it does not have a library. It doesn't have an internal library where people, DJs can kind of like just pick and choose what's at the radio station. What you're hearing from the music side are people's personal collections.
Wow.
Which means that you're hearing people that have deep personal connections with the music, and that can actually tell you about what you're listening to and tie it into different important connections of what's going on or different people involved in the music.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just in terms of that, I think it's a very powerful and impactful and unique radio station. And it again just is a testament to the depth of the people that are involved there.
So what was the next step from WPFW?
Well, concurrently was playing the music, like learning how to play jazz music, but also you know, I was in an indie band, and on top of us being friends and being, you know, aligned in terms of what we wanted to do in the music scene, in that particular music community of DC, I think there was the aspect of, we saw that they were, again, in the segregated music community, certain communities have certain resources that aren't available to others. So after being in a band for a couple of years, we formed relationships and friendships within specifically the indie music community. There were, at that time, it was house shows mostly, a lot, endless house shows.
Who was organizing the house shows?
People that lived at those houses.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who were also musicians?
Yeah. But there were also a number of DIY places like Rhizome, not a house, but it would be, you know, warehouses, or it would be, you know, your classic DIY space situation, a warehouse or like a storefront, things like that. And actually, so we as a band, led by the drummer, spearheaded by the drummer mainly, but we as a band started a space that was called the DC Mini Gallery.
Where was that?
It was right on 14th and Crittenden.
Okay.
And that was our rehearsal space, and there were shows being thrown there, punk shows.
What was the name of this band?
This was Laughing Man.
Okay.
Yeah. And basically it was a short-lived venture because it got shut down by the neighborhood. The neighborhood didn't want a space like that there at the time. So before we had some underground shows happening, and then before we had a chance to really open, it got shut down essentially. For a lot of reasons. At that same time, we had another space, also where the drummer lived. It was one of these classic DC alley buildings in Kings Court in Capitol Hill Southeast, and it looked like a recording studio then. Now it is a proper recording studio. I forget the guy whose name, but he was in a band that we played with back in the day. But yeah, that was our rehearsal space as well. And I think from there is when we really were able to make more inroads in terms of offering space to other bands to rehearse and like form camaraderies and things within the context of all the other stuff that was happening as well, other DIY spaces, other people trying out certain things, in a DIY fashion. And then eventually we were able to move into what was called, at that time, Gold Leaf Studios, 411 New York, 443 I Street, Northwest. It had again, as is normal with these spaces, it had a bunch of names over the years.
Name a few.
It was called like the Hosiery. It was called 443 I Street. Gold Leaf Studios is what I started to know it as. When we moved in there, we named our specific space Red Door. Okay. Because you had to go through a red door to get there. And it was like a red door, you go up a spiral staircase and you're right there.
And it was also, in addition to your studio, a space?
It was our space. Yeah.
But you hosted events there also?
Okay. Yeah.
What kind of events were happening at Red Door?
Well, it was different. Like, I think all three of us had like very different interests, I mean, we were all interested in the same thing, but I think we maybe perhaps specialized in different things, I was more into jazz and experimental music, as always, and the drummer was more into like maybe pop, and the guitar player was more into, like the punk of the day, I'll say. So there were those things happening at the time, and then through different changes in the space within the space happened that allowed for different opportunities of using different areas of the space, and around that time is when I met Gio and CapitalBop started. And
what is CapitalBop?
CapitalBop is is a nonprofit organization based in DC dedicated to the promotion, preservation, and presentation of jazz.
Cool.
Yes.
And you and Gio have started that.
Yeah.
Why did you start that organization? Which is doing a lot nowadays, I know.
Yeah. So, again, within the context of I was in an indie punk band, but also I was on the jazz scene, you know, as a bass player. And I remember we would be interviewed, the punk band would be interviewed, or the indie band would be interviewed, Laughing Man. And I would always be talking about the punk, or the jazz stuff that was happening. Because again, I noticed quickly the segregation of the scenes. So like when the indie community had, you know, a very large platform in DC, the indie rock community, which was mostly white, had the biggest platform, had a lot of reach, a lot of resources. And we're only kind of talking about indie stuff in terms of what's good in DC. It was like, oh, this band, blah, 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 this band, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, well, have you heard this amazing jazz music that's happening in DC as well? And a lot of them, you know, that connection hadn't been made. So, you know, I was doing, you know, little jazz experimental things. And then Gio and I got together and we started the DC Jazz Loft, which was really, in one aspect, the goal was to put jazz in that context of the DIY, of the contemporary DIY community, almost in a way of reclaiming that space for that music, which birthed DIY in DC and elsewhere. Like the warehouse loft sort of vibe, where I guess the connotation at that time and probably still today is, you know, a punk band, you know, a lot of sweaty dudes with tattoos and piercings in a warehouse or something like that. When mostly white people, when in reality, going back to, you know, many decades ago, it was jazz that was in those spaces, and it was specifically radical black jazz music that was in those spaces, and it was that legacy that I wanted to reclaim in those spaces. And as a result, in those first shows, especially at Gold Leaf, Red Door, you know, most of the people that came that were already used to going there to see their favorite indie band came there to see jazz and were exposed to jazz for the first time, you know. So those same people that had no idea about what was going on were exposed to this music.
So then, was the next place Union Arts, or was there?
Well, in between Union Arts and Gold Leaf, I had another space at Joe's Movement Emporium, but that was just my rehearsal space. And there were a lot of sort of like itinerant activities. Actually, one of them was with Lane at the Back Alley Theater.
He told
which was an amazing, also an important historical connection to DC. It started off as an experimental theater in the 60s that, in fact, hosted the only live theater presentation of like Amiri Baraka's The Dutchman, for instance, which was a movie, but as a play, it was never performed, not even in New York. It was performed in at the Back Out at this, you know, experimental theater, in the 60s, and that legacy continued at the back alley theater.
Was that the place in somebody's, somebody lived there?
It was in the basement. It was in the basement of an apartment building.
Yeah.
An apartment co-op, yeah. A lot of amazing things happened there as well. Yeah, and I met Lane around the time of the DC Many, because he was living at 14th and Crittenden at that time, and he was hosting very interesting shows in his basement. You know, again, part of the vast house show community, you know, in DC.
Yeah.
But his events were always experimental, more experimental music leaning. So yeah, DC Jazz Loft started, and again, through various changes in the space, I found myself having more responsibility in the space. And then it closed. The shows were itinerant there for a little while, and then the manager, the official manager at Gold Leaf, found Union Arts and basically contacted me, and we went in there and like started it together.
Who's this person?
It was called Union Arts and Manufacturing at first, which was with Mike Abrams, and we had the bottom floor and the top floor, and yeah, that was the start of a lot of things. But again, it was like me finding myself. It wasn't like a intentional, I'm gonna go start a space.
Yeah.
It was like, through my activities, I found myself in the position of responsibility, so to speak. But also being aligned with what I felt was important to present and to happen. And
when
it
was this?
And became part of my artistry. This was in, Union Arts?
Yeah.
It was 2012, started in 2012.
And how long was
November of 2012 until November of 2016.
Okay, 4 years. That's a long time.
It's all right.
It should have been longer, of course.
It should have been longer.
Do you want to get another napkin? Because that one is leaving things on your face now.
Yeah.
Sorry, we put you
it's
like, now it's like
now.
Blazing. We don't have a lot. Tell me a little more about Union Arts. That's how I first learned about this music, and it was, I think I told you once about one of the event.
Yeah. Union Arts was my studio, and it was a place where a lot of events were able to happen. A lot of important musical presentations were able to happen, I think. Things that probably wouldn't be here otherwise if that weren't there. And I think it opened DC up to a lot of activities in the music. I think it opened up the ears of DC. I mean, if I can, it helped to. And the cool thing about Rhizome is that it's culminated a lot of those communities that were sort of disparate. It was starting to happen with Union Arts, but it really manifested here. And I definitely remember one of the early meetings about Rhizome was at Union Arts, and in that conversation, it was kind of decided that the community is going to coalesce, because it was like Union Arts is closing soon, so now the community is going to coalesce around this one space, and it'll be cool. Which I think is deeply important. I've said this many times, but again, within the context of DIY and identity within DIY, musically and otherwise, I think it's an important statement that Rhizome was created out of the experimental community. The community that's truly marginalized, aesthetically and otherwise. The fact that Rhizome specifically has made the most powerful stand in modern contemporary DC is a testament to and a strong statement for experimental communities overall, and like just changing, again, reclaiming the space, the cultural space of and legacy within DIY underground movements.
So now that Rhizome is kind of facing at least the demise of this house, that many of us claim as kind of a home ground in one way or another, how does that make you feel about the evolution of the journey?
I mean, it makes me sad in a lot of ways, because it's just like, okay, here we go again. You know, this is I've seen this happen, you know, half a dozen times, you know, personally. And it's just like, it makes me think about, again, this city and this area and sort of the larger things that are happening, again, with gentrification, displacement.
How do you feel about this, the actual physical act of displacement, the fact that this building somehow is going to be lifted up and be where the stage is right now?
Yeah, it's literally going to be displaced.
Yeah.
But it's apparently going to be for the sake of affordable housing. So you can't argue with that.
Yeah, you definitely can. You cannot argue with affordable housing, but every housing should be affordable.
Every housing should be affordable.
And this house doesn't need to move for affordable housing.
The arguable aspect is the fact that it's not affordable housing. Like the designation of what they call affordable housing is not affordable.
Yes.
But it's, you know, in the context of development, it's what's happening. You know? Like what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do?
We're gonna squat.
Yeah. Okay.
Tell me some good memory here in Rhizome.
A good memory in Rhizome?
Yeah.
So many.
You can tell me a few.
I mean, chilling with Peter Blaser and the synth workshops.
That was one of the beginning things, that happened here.
Yeah, that was one of the first things. Playing dozens of shows with Heart of the Ghost.
Are there any performances that are particularly memorable for you from Rhizome?
That I performed in?
You or somebody else? Both?
I mean, there's just so many.
You're gonna have to recall a couple.
There's so many. I mean, from Cahill El-Zabar, to David Murray, to even people like Carl Stone.
Yeah.
You know,
I loved his performance.
Playing a laptop in in the living room here.
Yeah.
You know, to Marshall Trammell, that residency, having the opportunity to do a residency, do a music residency.
Tell me about that a little bit.
Well, it was sort of like the culmination of where I was at the time. I had been experimenting with dancers, so I wanted to, and also developing a relationship with Arts for Art in New York. And so I was very honored to have been able to perform with Patricia Parker of Arts for Art, as well as Shay, who performed as well. And that was sort of like, I started working with dancers when I was still at Union Arts. So it was that aspect of it, my electronic stuff, which I don't get the opportunity for whatever reason to explore as much in a live context. So I wanted to show that, you know, the solo upright bass stuff, the solo bass guitar stuff, you know, then the ensemble stuff, you know, just all the aspects of where I was at the time, and it was amazing to be presented in that way, and Steve said some really lovely things at that time, and you know, I was just very honored that it can happen.
Cool. How do you think you yourself have benefited from being a part of Rhizome community, and how has the community benefited from your presence here?
That's a good question. How's the community benefited?
You can just imagine.
I think about just like, you know, I'm one member of a vast and beautiful community of creators and organizers, and I think I can consider myself being part of the core group that helped start it.
Every person in the interview mentioned Luke Stewart, so you must have some connection to this space.
Okay. So yeah, I think it's deeply important for the reasons I said before, in terms of the reclamation of cultural space for the experimental community. But I think the community benefits from that example, from that statement. It benefits from being, or at least having the opportunity to be awoken a little bit more. It has the opportunity to be exposed to more of these rare, unique occurrences, like I've experienced so many times over the years in DC, in one centralized location.
Yeah.
You know, there's less of an aspect of like you got to know about it or like be on some kind of mailing list, even though there is that. But there's a nice website. You know, the information is out there for everybody to see.
Yeah.
Not like a lot of because the thing about DC also is that there are a lot of things here that happen here with these historical connections for free that don't happen anywhere else.
Yeah, indeed.
But you have to be like really plugged in and really paying attention.
I feel so bad that I'm frying you under the sun. You're like suffering.
It's all good.
Just take a minute and have some water, please. And we'll finish soon, so you're almost done with the torture. So I want to a few like concluding, I guess, questions. So from what you said, yes, this community exists beyond the space. What is it that keeps it together, basically?
It's again this idea of, for me, it's the exposure of this music to as many people in an organized way as possible, which increases its potency, I think, and gives people an entryway into the community. It's an aspect of the specifically DC community again that has as much depth as any other, but has been again marginalized aesthetically. Yet it is one of the it's the most freeing in terms of its invitation to anybody. I think that's one of the beautiful things about it as well.
Yeah.
It's a safe space for any marginalized community to be a part of. And it also just musically it offers a unique opportunity for spiritual connection, for musical and artistic innovation, for the creation of something new, a new way of being.
Yeah.
Yeah, just having that approach to the music rather than like an already set style. which is a fashion as well.
Yeah.
Like it's not, nobody's telling anybody to be experimental, so
Yeah.
to speak. But somebody somewhere is telling somebody to be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Just to follow up from that, and this is like sort of the big overlaying question that I want to explore also. You're mentioning how this is a safe space for these people, for experimental people who are generally basically they don't have so many spaces to relay their message. I want to like tell me a little bit, for you personally, what constitutes a safe space and an open space to this kind of experimentation?
A safe space is one where anybody is welcome. There's no strict barriers economically, and there's no barriers of culture. Even though there are some aspects of that, which also goes along with the larger context of the larger context of the international experimental community, within the larger context of what Rhizome has developed into, from what it started off as, in the ways that it has opened up so much to the greater community in DC, the greater music community in DC. So those dynamics are here, very much so. Again, talking about that segregation of the music communities, because I mean, as you've experienced, I'm sure, you know, some shows attract certain people, other shows attract other people.
Yeah.
And it's very clear what's going on.
So how do you bridge those kind of divides and that invite? What is your take on that? Not that we're going to solve that today, but
it's complicated. It's very complicated because it's also within the greater context of DC and gentrification and suspicion also. And also, like, this is Tacoma Park, which has a connotation within this area for sure. And Rhizome kind of fits within that connotation.
You're speaking very secretly.
There was one instance I remember in which something was happening here on the porch, and the cops were called, and they were like, "Oh, that's just like white people doing white people shit."
Wow.
You know. So again, like there's that connotation here as well.
Yeah.
And also, this used to be a hairdresser. Like this was a hairdresser where, like, you know, scores and scores of black women got their hair done right in there. And now it's this. What does that mean?
That's a good question.
You know, how many of those black women have come back here? Or like how many people who still live in this neighborhood when it was that pass by and be like, "Oh, that's what it is now," or like, "Oh, I didn't realize it's," et cetera, you know. What does that mean? Like, has Rhizome gentrified as well? Has Rhizome invited this?
Have you gentrified?
And this? Has Rhizome invited all this? I don't know. Is that another conversation, or should we talk about that too? Okay.
I mean, these are questions that I don't think answering will really. I mean, yeah.
In the pattern.
Does the art gentrify also in general, and what does that mean? Do we stop doing it?
In the context, well, I've been through this argument a lot before, and for me, it comes to like, of course, the greater narrative, the greater accepted narrative is that art breeds gentrification, which there's a lot of evidence and a lot of practices that certainly back that up. But then it also calls into question, like, what kind of artist are you? Like, are you the type of artist that is a gentrifier? Are you gentrifying not just your space, or are you gentrifying the art by you making that art? Are you taking away from somebody's legacy? Are you erasing the memory of a legacy in space and in art? It calls these things into question.
Totally.
I've always been against the idea of art as gentrification, from the aspect of the artist as being a member of the working poor, and the working poor can only afford to live in certain neighborhoods. So you will find artists wherever there are so-called poor people. There will probably be artists there, but within the contemporary context of what it is to be an artist, a lot of artists nowadays, for better or worse, it just is what it is. A lot of people come from well-to-do families, or in America, a lot of them come from like well-to-do families, or like went to a really expensive school, and have a situation where, you know, somebody is footing the bill for them to gentrify Petworth, or to gentrify 8th Street and call themselves an artist or something like this, or to gentrify Brooklyn and call themselves an artist. And is Rhizome part of that? Is Rhizome serving some of those people? I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's something that has to be examined for each of us in general. Again, I take the aspect that artists are, again, part of the working class. And depending on how you operate and what advantages and how much luck you have as well.
That's a big part.
In terms of opportunities, I don't necessarily believe in luck, but I believe in putting yourself in the way of opportunities.
Yeah. What is like the next opportunity for this community, Rhizome? What are your hopes and dreams for the next chapter?
Well, I think the next chapter is a testament to the great work that Rhizome has done over the past 5 or so years, and the fact that there's money in the bank, and there's a huge amount of community support.
Yes.
So I think Rhizome's going to be fine. There's going to be another space. And
do you think it's going to be in DC?
I don't know. I don't know if it should be in DC either. I mean, is it in DC now? Technically it is, but it serves a Maryland community.
Yeah.
You know, also an aspect of this complicated DMV demographic situation.
Yeah.
Because we're technically in DC, one of the most expensive cities, right across from another very expensive city in Maryland.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's it's definitely not the most expensive, but it's
up there.
It's up there, yeah. It's also the Berkeley of the East. That's one of the signs, right? You know, again, these dynamics of these cultural dynamics of race, economics, all these things. So yeah, that's why I asked, should it be in DC? I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah.
maybe it should be in Tacoma or in Hyattsville or really anywhere where it's affordable
and it can have an outside space.
And it can have an outside space. You know, within the context of this past year and pandemic time, we have to think about space differently.
Yeah.
It's not about four walls.
No.
It's always been about a community, but I think the recognition and the focus on that community needs to happen more so now. It's not about saving this building. It's about saving the community.
Saving the stories.
Yeah, saving the stories and saving the stories. And yeah, preserving the community.
Yeah.
And wherever that space is, whether it's four walls or the infinite space of outdoors, then I think the outdoor aspect definitely should be preserved.
Yeah.
It's making artists think about how we present our art in spaces differently as well.
Yeah.
It's another opportunity to think about how we want to place our art in various important locations, or
yes,
you know, draw these spiritual energies, you know, from different places.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of them here, going along with that historical memory and things like this. So I hope more things like that happen, and I hope more people are turned on to those sorts of things happening. And I hope Rhizome can be a part of that happening.
Cool. I think that's it for me. Do you have anything else you want to add?
Let's see. Anything else I want to add? Yeah, I'll talk about one specific elder mentor, which is Aaron Martin. Very important aspect of Rhizome, and has been a very important aspect of everything I've done musically since we first connected just before Gold Leaf, and through all of my activities, all of my organizational developments, he was right there, and he was definitely a part of the Rhizome community as well. So, Aaron Martin Jr. Always stay anti-racist, anti-imperialist, and anti-capitalist, and anti-sexist.
Yeah, those are good words to end this recording on.